Hamilton, a city with close to 520,000 residents in southern Ontario, in the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois territory, is known for having one of the earliest African-Canadian neighborhoods called Little Africa, for its National Historic Site, the Griffin House, for having one of Canada's oldest Black churches, the Stewart Memorial, and for being an Underground Railroad destination.
Hamilton is a third destination of choice for new immigrants coming to Ontario. In total, immigrants, who are mainly of European descent, make up 1/4 of the Hamilton population. 2.8% of Hamiltonians identify as Indigenous and 14.3% as racial minorities. In 2014, Hamilton declared itself a sanctuary city, becoming only the second city in Canada to do so. So what could possibly go wrong in the home city of Lincoln Alexander, Canada's first Black MP and cabinet minister?
This documentary brings us back to 2001, a few days after the September 11th attacks in New York and Virginia. Hamilton would come to be defined on national and international news as a hick town, a depository of racial hate crime.
That was a very unfortunate situation where some individual, based on their racist ideology, burned a temple. And it was an embarrassment for the city, not only for the city, for the people who were affected directly, impacting on them in terms of them feeling unwelcomed in a community that they call their home.
It was a horrific thing that happened. I think the positive is that many groups came together after that in solidarity, and I have a poster to this day of a crime against one is a crime against all. I think it brought a lot together. There were some amazing things, some coalitions, some anti-racism groups. Certainly Hamilton Center for Civic Inclusion came out of it. My kids were part of Peace Choir, which was a Muslim Jewish choir that performed at Hamilton Place. And I think it did a lot to bring groups together. I really do think it did a lot as a catalyst for change.
Today it's the Hindu Samaj temple. Tomorrow it could be the church. It could be the mosque. It could be a mosque, a synagogue, gurdwara, or whatever. So we came together as a community and say never again. And out of that came the organization we are sitting in right now, Hamilton Center for Civic Inclusion. So while it was extremely painful, out of that was the birth of a new vision for a city where we want to be a center of excellence around diversity and inclusion.
3 Caucasian men have been charged for the Hindu Samaj Temple hate crime of September 14, 2001. It was one of the worst examples of firebombing attacks in North America post 9/11. The intended target was the Muslim community. Prior to the firebombing, in fact, smaller attacks had occurred that night at a nearby mosque. The Hindu Samaj temple burning is one of many ways that racism manifests. But what is racism? We asked our participants, and this is what they had to say.
Racism is, of course, not merely a question of white versus non-white, but that is the dominant manifestation and expression. And quite specifically white supremacy in Canada, if we take into account colonialism and imperialism and slavery in Canada, we have to recognize that the dominant form or the dominant manifestation of racism in Canada is white supremacy.
Racism is a systemic problem. I think racism is a system whereby some people without white skin privilege are put at a disadvantage because white skinned people believe ourselves to be superior in most ways, and understand that our value system and the values of white Europeans generally are what is considered normal, successful, something to be aspired to. So when I talk about racism, I generally mean the systemic issues and the racism as a larger societal problem. I think people can be racist, but I think that paying too much attention to individual acts of racism and individual responses sometimes gets us lost. And it isn't just about, I know Canadians pride ourselves on white Canadians pride ourselves on being quite non-racist because we're always comparing ourselves to Americans. But I think that by and large, what we are is polite racists, if that isn't too much of a contradiction. And I think polite or not, racism is racism. And it's a system whereby, you know, an entire group of people is disadvantaged because one group thinks itself superior to everyone else.
I think it shows up in a number of ways. And it really does permeate in pretty well every part of life that you can imagine, from education to employment, accessing assistance from social services. It's everywhere. And it can be overwhelming sometimes to actually think about exactly how it all plays out, because as a person that is visibly white, I don't experience it firsthand. I have that enjoyment of that privilege to not have to be faced with it immediately, but being acutely aware of it and working in the social services, I saw it happen. I saw it play out. And and then on the other side of the coin, if I ever revealed my ancestral background, then sometimes I'm treated differently because of it once a person is aware of it. That has occurred. So sort of, in my experience, everywhere in Hamilton, it's everywhere.
Racism is a form of oppression, an oppression based on race, wherein racial populations are placed into a hierarchy with one racial group being dominant and the other or others subordinate. This racial hierarchy has material outcomes, such as greater wealth, health, freedom of movement, political representation, and better occupations afforded to the dominant group. In addition, it has ideological outcomes, with some racial groups said to be civilized, powerful, more beautiful, or intelligent, and others said to be prone to laziness, drunkenness, savagery, crime, welfare dependency, and sexual aggression. The effects of racism are painful. The manifestations of racism tend to fall into the following categories: institutional racism, cultural racism, and interpersonal racism. These manifestations can be blatant or subtle, intended or unintended, and occur through action or inaction, presence or absence. We asked our participants to share examples of racism they have witnessed or experienced. One common theme was racial bias from an authority. This is what they had to say.
One of the simplest things and the most, I think, impactful for me and dangerous for that family that I worked with was helping a family with a child who was 6 years old, a boy. He was very dark skinned. He was suspended 3 times from school, and the reasons that were given was that he scared the teacher. And when I asked the teacher, what do you mean? You know, she said, well, I'm scared of him. You know, look how he looks at us. And when he's talking, he's yelling too much. And he was suspended at 6 years old. He doesn't even know why. His parents didn't know how to deal with that. But that boy from kindergarten, grade 1, grade 2, becomes, I guess, funneled into a position where he's told, you're bad, and what she told him was, you're good jail material at 6. What do you think is going to happen to him as he proceeds through the school system with that record and with that, you know, reputation of a 6-year-old boy?
For my daughter and for our family, schools have been the most challenging location and space for us, because Kira's life is not in any way represented in her curriculum. She doesn't have the ability to talk to many of the teachers in the ways that others of us might have. Kira doesn't see herself reflected in curriculum. Kira doesn't see, and we don't see, Black people reflected in curriculum in any way beyond Black History Month. And this year in particular was extremely challenging and excruciating when the teachers at her school decided to show the help as a Black History project. And I don't know if people are familiar with the movie, but it's extremely problematic in its representation of white people. It's extremely problematic in terms of its representation of Black people, and it certainly doesn't represent any actual historical moments, or it uses the backdrop of civil rights to come up with a story that makes white people really feel good about themselves, but by and large plays into racist stereotypes and the ideas of white people rescuing all the time. When we have challenged teachers on that, they actually say to our white faces that our expectations are too high. That in fact, as a young Black child who is adopted, perhaps there are challenges that we're not willing to think about and we haven't been willing to accept. And so perhaps she won't be an A student, when in fact she's quite capable of being an A student.
It was 2003, so that was the year I was wrapping up my dissertation, and my friends and I were at in the parking lot of a shopping mall in Toronto. And the interesting thing is that we made it a point that we're going to be under the lamps, the street lamps in the parking lot, so we could be clearly visible. And what we found interesting was that we could tell when the undercover cop car came into the parking lot, drove out, and we knew that the uniformed cops would be coming very shortly. And 6 cars turned up with about 8 cops. The first guy that came demanded to see ID, and we refused because we're not on the road. The Highway Traffic Act does not apply. We asked if we were reported by anyone, by mall security, and he said no. So our position was, you're not getting any ID. We're not causing any disturbance, so you need to leave us alone. And that's when he called for backup. And we spent the next hour basically in a standoff with these big burly white guys standing around us with their hands on their gun, and the one black guy standing about 10 feet back just observing the whole situation. So this cop knew what was going on and he wanted no part of it. So what that said to me is that as a grown man, with my friends, one guy's a principal, the other guy's a very successful entrepreneur, the way that we use space, the way that we exist in space, suggests that our bodies criminalize particular types of spaces. And so we have to be surveilled and regulated and controlled.
Long time ago, when I'm in Hamilton, I think it's in 1998, that's what I feel like this country is not my country. That's the first time I feel that for that punch in my heart. My children, they played outside. He seen the beautiful car and he was interested to look at. So he's standing on a sidewalk and he looked at. And the white man, he came and as a machete, he have it his own hand. And he's kind of like running after my son. My son, he runs, he goes all the way around. He came home, he was crying, and he says, Mom, it's one man came after me for machete. And I don't know what the machete is. He says, Mom, he have a big axe, you know, and he explaining to me, and my heart is kind of like starts pumping. I drive him to where he seen the man. The old woman came out and she asked me, I asked her, I said, did you see any activity is going on? And she said, no. And then suddenly is, not young, not old, it's a middle-aged man came out. And he came and he says, you are fucking black niggers, what are you doing here for my property? And I looked at him and I said, don't ever say to me for that one, and I'm not talking to you. He says, you are talking to my mother. He came to my face, his nose, and kind of like he spit in my face. I didn't want to start fight, but my blood was, boiled to the 100 degrees up to the top. And when I called the 911, they told me go home and stay on the line until I go home and be safe, blah blah blah. And then I went home. Suddenly it's man and woman officers, they came in my house. They said, oh, Mrs. Elmi, we wanted to talk to you, so What's the problem? Who was the child? I said, oh, it's my son. Can we talk to him? Yeah, you can talk to him. I called my son, Omar, come out. He come out. He's standing. And he says, you can go inside your house. I said, no, he's a child. He needs me. And he says, boy, you don't have to put on for everything on the top of your head. And then he says, oh, don't put on all the problem up to the sky, put it down, boy. And then suddenly it's clicked in my mind, and I was watching a lot of movies and a lot of, the racism and what's, when is black American, when they came in, they call him boy, They don't call son, or they don't call young man, they call boy. And then I was very upset. And I said, listen, what you talking about? And you said it, boy. I don't like it, that word is a boy. First of all, his name is Omar. And last name is Muhammad. And if you wanted to call Muhammad, or if you wanted to call Omar, it's up to you. But his name is Omar, not boy. And we are not the niggers. And that's what he called me, a nigger. And plus, where I come from, we don't call nobody is a nigger. And we don't know for that word even. And the police says to me, oh, you are very upset, so don't worry about it. So we know these things. And I said, do you know him for the guy? Did you see the machete? And he says, we didn't see nothing. I kind of like, it's blowed my mind. And I said, okay, all of you, it's a white, number one. Number two, it's no woman's officer between you, because the woman officer with me, she left and she's not there anymore. And I said, first of all, if you don't leaving my property, I will call 911. He says, we are the 911. I said, I don't care about it. Still, I will call the 911. And I called the 911 again to the police. And I said, it's a white police came, and I needed a black man police officer to come, at least to feel safe, because right now I don't feel safe. The police is left. Next day is like, that night I couldn't even sleep, because first of all, what I feel it is like the man who have a machete, now he knows my house. Okay, and the police is still they going around me. And I said, who am I feeling safe? The police around me is a safe, or the one who called me boy, my son, is a safe, or the one who grabbed the machete is a safe? Which one do I have to feel safe? And he says to me, the officer, again, he says, where do you come from? I said, I came from East Africa, Somalia. And he gave it to me another lecture. He says to me, it's a Somalia, they have a civil war. I said, yeah. And he says to me, it's this country, you don't have to fight, because that was your mentality things is gonna tell you that guy, he have a machete. I said, number one, I born in Somalia, I grow up in Somalia, I left it when Somalia was peace. Okay, I never seen my life for gun. I never seen my life for police officer who's coming to my house and threatening me. And I never seen it for machete, except when we cutting the woods. I never seen it. So, and my son, I bring to this country when he was 1 year old. He never seen his life for any problem. So don't tell me where I come from. That means I have the already, you targeted me, because I came from for civil war, and that's my mentality, everything. Don't tell me.
These are but a few of the countless accounts of manifestations of racism in our city, together touching each category: interpersonal, cultural, and institutional. Many people have developed strategies to respond to racism and heal from its effects. We would like to explore two strategies, one being a healing circle and the other advocacy for institutional change. What you are seeing here is a workshop on healing racism, led by Nurindanan and Zanab Amadahi.
So when we pay attention to our breath, it can be a gateway to touching our feelings. As our body often sends us signals about how we're feeling, and sometimes it takes our mind a long time to catch up to what it is that's going on in the body. And so just doing this kind of mindful practice of paying attention to your breath can help you identify how you're feeling at any given moment. And when we're doing the work of anti-racism, or the work of community building and healing, the breath can really be a tool for our practice. So for a practical application for our discussions today, I invite you to continue coming back to your breath as a way of checking in on how you're feeling or acknowledging what's being said or while you're speaking, and also to offer support when somebody else is sharing, and to bring yourself back to the practice of deep listening.
The facilitators also guided us into a body movement in expressing and releasing trauma from racism.
For those of you who are familiar with animals in the wild or in your home, with pets or whatever, what do animals do when they've been traumatized? When they're afraid, when they've been in a chase, what do they do? What do they do? When they're trying to come back from a close call? Nobody?
Stretch.
They stretch, they move. And sometimes they literally shake it off, right? They just shake it off. They shake their whole bodies. So instinctively, they know that one of the ways that you process trauma and refocus is to move the body, right? So what I'm going to ask us to do is just, if we could share with each other, this is going to be completely body directed. So I'm going to give you a moment to just focus on your body and feel what it's trying to say, what it would like to share with the group right now. And then I'd like you to do that in a gesture or a movement. I'd like you to step out into the middle of the circle and do some kind of a gesture. Share a movement with us that is from your body, from your spirit to ours.
Healing the trauma of racism is important, and racialized minorities need more spaces and tools at their disposal for this purpose. However, that is a strategy for addressing the impact of racism and not its cause. Other strategies, such as the one that follows, focus on the source of racism and demand institutional change.
The people united will never be defeated. 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 Don't you! Don't you! Don't you! Don't you! Don't you! Carding, we say no. Profiling has got to go. Racial carding, we say no. Profiling has got to go. Racial carding, we say no. Profiling has got to go.
This march took place on December 1st, 2014, organized by the Black, Brown, and Red Lives Matter group of Hamilton. It demanded that the Hamilton police end all forms of racial bias in policing. For instance, the controversial practice of carding, alternatively called street checks.
There are many other types of anti-racism work that can be done, however. As fellow Hamiltonians, what do you think you can do to make Hamilton a more inclusive and equitable city? For indeed, an attack on one is an attack on all.
Help me, each other.